There comes a moment in life when you stop explaining yourself, stop begging to be noticed, stop proving your worth to people who only value your presence when it benefits them. And that moment changes everything, because the truth is terrifying. The day you stop showing up for people who take you for granted is the day you finally see who was only feeding off your energy, who was only using your loyalty, who was only comfortable because you kept making their life easier while silently making your own life heavier. Most people don't fear losing you. They fear losing access to you. And once you understand that, your entire life begins to shift. So if you're tired of being the one who always checks in, always gives, always sacrifices, always stays available, then this message is for you. Watch until the end, because what you're about to hear may not just change how you see others, it may change how you see yourself forever. And if this kind of truth speaks to your spirit, consider subscribing to this channel for more content like this. Because some messages are not just meant to be heard, they are meant to wake you up. Now listen carefully, because this is where the illusion begins to break. Stop showing up and see what happens. Not out of bitterness, not out of revenge, not because you want to punish anyone, but because sometimes the only way to discover the truth about your place in people's lives is to step back and watch what falls apart in your absence. For too long, you may have mistaken your usefulness for love. You may have believed that because people called you when they were in trouble, because they leaned on you when life became heavy, because they needed your time, your comfort, your patience, your understanding, that somehow meant they valued you deeply. But being needed is not the same as being cherished. Being used consistently can look a lot like being loved, especially when your heart is good. And that is one of the cruelest lessons life will ever teach you, because the kind-hearted often become invisible in the very spaces where they are most essential. People get used to your consistency. They get used to your softness. They get used to your forgiveness. They get used to your emotional labor. They get used to your sacrifice. And after a while, they stop seeing it as something precious. They start seeing it as normal, expected, automatic. They begin to act as though your presence is simply part of the furniture of their life, something that will always be there no matter how carelessly they treat it. And that is where the danger begins. Because when you become too available, too accommodating, too understanding, too self-abandoning, people rarely stop you. In fact, many will let you bleed for them while calling it love. They will watch you overextend yourself and call it loyalty. They will receive from you endlessly and call it friendship. They will lean on your strength while never asking how much holding them is costing you. And the most painful part is this: you may not even realize it's happening until you become exhausted, until you feel empty, until your soul begins to whisper what your mouth has been too afraid to say. This is not mutual. That whisper is sacred, because it is the beginning of your awakening. There is a version of you that has spent too much of life performing devotion for people who only appreciate convenience. A version of you that kept showing up because you believed consistency would eventually be recognized. A version of you that thought if you loved harder, stayed longer, gave more, explained better, forgave faster, tolerated deeper, then maybe people would finally understand your worth. But some people do not misunderstand your worth. They benefit from your lack of boundaries. That is a painful distinction. And if you do not understand it, you will spend years trying to earn what should have been given freely. Respect, reciprocity, consideration, care. The Stoic mind understands something most people spend half their life resisting. Not everyone deserves unlimited access to your energy. That does not make you cold. That makes you conscious, because peace is expensive. And if you are not careful, people will spend it recklessly. They will call you when they are lonely but disappear when you are hurting. They will ask for your support but become absent when you need theirs. They will drain your emotional reserves and then accuse you of changing when you finally decide to protect yourself. And that is where many people break. Not because they are weak, but because they are wounded by the realization that they were loyal to people who were only attached to their usefulness. There is a grief that comes with waking up. A silent grief. A private kind of heartbreak. The heartbreak of realizing that some of the connections you held most dearly were never as deep as you thought they were. The heartbreak of discovering that some people loved your availability more than they loved your soul. The heartbreak of understanding that your silence reveals more truth than your effort ever did. Because when you stop showing up, everything becomes visible. The one who never checks on you, visible. The one who only calls when they need something, visible. The one who disappears the moment you stop carrying the relationship, visible. The one who never once poured into you the way you poured into them, visible. And truth has a way of hurting before it heals. But make no mistake, it heals. Because once you see clearly, you can never again return to blindness without betraying yourself. That is why so many people remain trapped in one-sided relationships, one-sided friendships, one-sided family dynamics, one-sided emotional arrangements. Not because they cannot see the truth, but because seeing the truth demands a decision. And decisions require courage. It takes courage to stop overfunctioning in places where you are undervalued. It takes courage to become less available to those who only know how to take. It takes courage to let silence expose what effort was hiding. It takes courage to step back and risk being forgotten by people you worked hard to matter to. But sometimes being forgotten by the wrong people is the first step toward remembering yourself. And that is what this is really about. Not them, you. This is about the moment you finally stop betraying your own spirit just to maintain connections that are starving you. This is about reclaiming the parts of yourself that got buried under people-pleasing, emotional labor, loyalty without reciprocity, and love without discernment. This is about becoming whole enough to understand that your peace is not a public resource. Your energy is not a charity. Your presence is not a guarantee. And your life is too sacred to keep offering yourself in places where your absence is never noticed until your usefulness is missing. Read that again in your soul. Some people do not miss you. They miss what you did for them. That realization alone can save you years of emotional poverty, because it teaches you to stop confusing attention with affection. A person can text you every day and still not value you. A person can call you often and still not care for you deeply. A person can say, "I need you," and still never truly see you. Need is not always love. Sometimes need is dependency. Sometimes need is convenience. Sometimes need is habit. And if you build your identity around being needed, you will become a prisoner in your own relationships. You will feel guilty every time you try to rest. You will feel selfish every time you try to set a boundary. You will feel anxious every time you choose yourself. Because somewhere along the way, you were conditioned to believe that your value is measured by how much of yourself you can give away. But that is not value. That is conditioning. And it is destroying people quietly every day. Look around. So many people are smiling while emotionally collapsing inside. So many are functioning while spiritually depleted. So many are surrounded by people, yet deeply unseen. Why? Because they have become experts at being useful while forgetting how to be whole. They know how to rescue, how to help, how to support, how to soothe, how to carry, how to fix, but they do not know how to stop. And what is never stopped is eventually abused. That is why stepping back is not weakness. It is wisdom. It is not dramatic to disappear from spaces where your humanity is ignored. It is not cruel to stop overgiving to those who undervalue you. It is not selfish to ask whether the people around you actually nourish your spirit or merely consume it. This is not about becoming heartless. It is about becoming honest. There is a difference. A heartless person stops caring because they have become numb. A healed person stops overgiving because they have become aware. Awareness changes everything. Once you become aware of how often you are the initiator, the peacemaker, the emotional container, the one who reaches out first, the one who apologizes first, the one who checks in first, the one who sacrifices first, you can no longer pretend the imbalance is invisible. And once you see imbalance, you must choose. Continue betraying yourself to preserve the illusion, or honor the truth and begin to withdraw your energy. That withdrawal will feel uncomfortable at first. Of course it will. You are not just changing behavior. You are breaking identity. You are dismantling the version of yourself that believed love had to be earned through self-erasure. And that process can feel like loss before it feels like liberation. You may feel lonely. You may question yourself. You may wonder if you are being too harsh, too distant, too different. You may even be tempted to go back to overgiving simply because it feels familiar. But familiarity is not always alignment. Sometimes what feels familiar is simply what has hurt you the longest. That is why growth often feels unnatural in the beginning, because you are no longer feeding patterns that once fed off you. And not everyone will like the new version of you. The moment you become less accessible, some people will call you changed. The moment you stop over-explaining, some will call you cold. The moment you set boundaries, some will call you difficult. The moment you stop carrying everyone else's emotional weight, some will act disappointed. But hear this clearly: the people who benefited most from your lack of boundaries will often be the ones most disturbed by your healing. Do not let that confuse you. Do not let guilt drag you back into self-abandonment. Do not let someone else's discomfort become a reason to betray your peace. Healing is disruptive to unhealthy systems. When you stop playing the role people assign to you, the entire dynamic gets exposed. And that exposure is necessary, because sometimes relationships do not end when you tell the truth. They end when you stop performing the lie. That is what silence reveals. That is what absence reveals. That is what stepping back reveals. Who reaches, who notices, who values, who remembers, who only loved the version of you that had no limits. The answers may wound you, but they will free you, and freedom is worth the wound. Because a life spent constantly proving your value to people who only appreciate your labor is not peace. It is survival, and survival is not the same as living. You were not created just to be emotionally available for everyone else while privately collapsing inside. You were not born just to be the strong one who never gets held. You were not designed to keep pouring from a cup that no one helps refill. At some point, the soul rebels. At some point, the inner self rises up and says, "No more. No more forced loyalty. No more silent suffering. No more overfunctioning. No more shrinking. No more begging to be seen in rooms where your spirit has already gone invisible." And that rebellion is holy, because it marks the beginning of self-respect. Self-respect is not loud. It does not always announce itself dramatically. Sometimes self-respect is simply choosing not to text first. Sometimes it is not over-explaining your absence. Sometimes it is allowing people to experience what life feels like without your constant emotional support. Sometimes it is refusing to rescue people from the consequences of how little they valued you. That is not revenge. That is revelation. Because when you stop filling every gap, you finally see who was never building with you in the first place. This is why many people fear silence. Silence is a mirror. Silence removes the distraction of performance and reveals the structure underneath. Was the relationship real, or were you just holding it together alone? Was the friendship mutual, or were you just emotionally financing the entire connection? Was the love deep, or were you simply convenient? Silence answers what words often hide, and some truths only arrive when you become unavailable. That is why stepping back is one of the most spiritual acts of discernment you can ever practice. It is the act of saying, "I will no longer force what is not flowing naturally." And that sentence alone can save your life, because so much suffering comes from forcing. Forcing people to understand you, forcing people to choose you, forcing people to care, forcing people to reciprocate, forcing people to see what they would have seen already if they truly valued you. There is exhaustion in forcing, but there is peace in observing. Observe who checks in when you go quiet. Observe who notices your absence. Observe who only appears when they need something. Observe who respects your boundaries and who resents them. Observe who is drawn to your essence and who is only attached to your access. Observation is power, and Stoicism teaches power through restraint. Not every truth needs to be announced. Sometimes the strongest move is to simply stop participating. No speech, no argument, no dramatic exit, just distance, just awareness, just self-preservation, just enough silence to let reality reveal itself. That is not weakness. That is mastery. because anyone can react, anyone can explode, anyone can beg to be understood. But it takes deep inner discipline to detach with clarity and let behavior speak louder than excuses. And behavior always speaks. People reveal themselves in patterns, not promises, not in apologies, not in pretty words, not in temporary effort after you've already started pulling away. Patterns tell the truth. Consistency tells the truth. Reciprocity tells the truth. And if you are honest, there may be people in your life whose patterns have been screaming the truth for a long time, but your heart kept translating it into hope. Hope is beautiful, but when misplaced, it becomes self-harm. There is a difference between giving people grace and giving them endless access to wound you. There is a difference between patience and self-abandonment. There is a difference between understanding someone's pain and allowing that pain to become your burden forever. You can be compassionate and still choose distance. You can love people and still refuse to let them drain you. You can understand someone's wounds and still decide not to become their emotional shelter at the cost of your own sanity. That is maturity. That is emotional sovereignty. That is the unbreakable mind. An unbreakable mind is not one that never feels pain. It is one that learns not to surrender itself every time pain appears. It is one that stops making itself smaller so others can remain comfortable. It is one that refuses to keep auditioning for spaces that should have honored it from the beginning. It is one that understands this simple but brutal truth. If your absence teaches them your value, then your presence was being taken for granted. And sometimes that lesson must be taught, not with words, with distance, because distance clarifies what closeness can conceal. When you are always there, people do not always realize what you carry. They do not always understand how much emotional structure you provide. They do not always appreciate how much stability your presence creates. But once you are gone, once you stop calling, once you stop checking in, once you stop fixing, once you stop reminding, once you stop carrying, once you stop rescuing, suddenly the weight becomes visible. Suddenly the silence becomes loud. Suddenly the absence becomes educational. And in that moment, one of two things happens. Either people rise and reveal that they truly value you, or they disappear and reveal that they only valued your function. Both outcomes are useful, because both outcomes tell the truth. And truth is always a gift, even when it arrives wrapped in disappointment. Do not fear disappointment. Fear illusion. Disappointment hurts once. Illusion drains you for years. Many people are not suffering because they are unloved. They are suffering because they are clinging to false versions of love. Love that asks them to overgive. Love that only appears when needed. Love that collapses the moment boundaries appear. Love that feels intense but is never truly safe. That is not love. That is instability wearing emotional perfume. Real love has consistency. Real love has care. Real love has reciprocity. Real love notices when you are tired. Real love does not feed off your self-neglect. Real love does not require you to disappear in order to be appreciated. And once you experience that kind of truth, your standards change forever. You stop begging. You stop chasing. You stop over-explaining. You stop performing emotional labor for people who have no intention of growing. You stop volunteering your peace to those who treat it casually. You stop handing your soul to people who only know how to consume. That is not becoming hard. That is becoming whole. And wholeness is dangerous to people who only knew how to access the fractured version of you. The fractured version of you was easier to manipulate, easier to guilt, easier to control, easier to keep around through inconsistency and crumbs. But the healed version notices everything. The healed version no longer mistakes attention for intention. The healed version no longer confuses chaos with passion. The healed version no longer bleeds to prove loyalty. The healed version can sit in silence and not chase what refuses to meet them halfway. That is power, quiet power, the kind of power that changes your life from the inside out. And yes, it may cost you relationships, but not all losses are tragedies. Some losses are rescue. Some endings are mercy. Some disconnections are divine protection in disguise. Some absences are what finally create room for your spirit to breathe again. You cannot keep asking for peace while clinging to people who disturb it. You cannot keep asking for healing while staying loyal to the environments that break you. You cannot keep praying for clarity while ignoring what behavior has already made obvious. At some point, you have to stop waiting for a dramatic sign. The pattern is the sign. The inconsistency is the sign. The emotional exhaustion is the sign. The loneliness you feel in certain connections is the sign. The fact that you feel more peaceful when you step back than when you stay deeply involved, that is the sign. Listen to it. Your body often knows before your mind admits it. Your spirit often gets tired before your mouth says enough. Pay attention to what drains you. Pay attention to where you feel invisible. Pay attention to who only contacts you when life goes wrong for them. Pay attention to who becomes irritated the moment you stop being endlessly available. That irritation tells you everything. Because people who genuinely care for you may miss your presence, but they will respect your need for space. People who only care about access will become upset the moment that access changes. That is how discernment sharpens. Not through fantasy, through observation, through stepping back, through silence, through no longer interrupting people's behavior with your constant effort. And this is where many lives begin to transform. The moment a person stops chasing validation and starts protecting energy, everything changes. The conversations change. The circles change. The standards change. The self-respect deepens. The desperation leaves. The noise fades. And suddenly, there is room. Room to hear yourself again. Room to think clearly. Room to feel what is yours and what was projected onto you. Room to remember who you are without everyone else's expectations hanging around your neck like chains. That is freedom. And freedom often begins with withdrawal. Not from life, from overexertion, from overavailability, from overattachment, from the addiction to being needed. Because being needed can feel intoxicating, can make you feel important, valuable, relevant, chosen. But if your sense of worth depends on how much others rely on you, then your identity is built on unstable ground. One day you will burn out. One day you will feel resentful. One day you will realize that you built your life around being accessible instead of being aligned. And when that day comes, you will understand why silence was necessary, why stepping back was necessary, why disappearing for a while was necessary. Because distance is where self-recovery begins. Distance is where the nervous system starts to unclench. Distance is where you hear your own needs again. Distance is where you stop living in reaction and start living in intention. Distance is where the unbreakable mind is forged. Not in chaos, in stillness, not in proving, in knowing, not in performance, in presence. The world teaches you to hustle for approval, to chase, to impress, to remain constantly visible, to keep proving your relevance. But Stoicism teaches the opposite. It teaches that your peace is more valuable than your performance, that your dignity matters more than your desperation, that your restraint is often more powerful than your reaction, that your silence can carry more truth than your explanations ever could. And that is why one of the most life-changing things you can ever do is this: stop showing up where you are not being honored, and see what happens. Watch carefully. Do not interfere. Do not rescue. Do not over-explain. Do not panic and rush back into old patterns because silence feels uncomfortable. Just observe. Observe what grows without your constant effort. Observe what dies without your constant sacrifice. Observe who notices. Observe who does not. Observe who reaches. Observe who remains silent. Observe who suddenly remembers your value only after your energy is gone. That observation is not cruelty. It is clarity. And clarity is expensive. Because once you have it, you can no longer keep lying to yourself comfortably. That is the cost of awakening. But it is also the beginning of peace. Because after enough disappointment, a wise person stops asking, "Why don't they value me?" and starts asking, "Why am I still available where I am not valued?" That question changes everything. It shifts your focus from chasing external validation to rebuilding internal standards. It returns your power. It restores your dignity. It teaches you that your worth is not up for negotiation just because someone failed to recognize it. Not everyone will know what to do with a soul like yours. Not everyone will know how to hold someone who is loyal, deep, emotionally aware, and willing to love with substance. Some will mishandle you simply because they are not built to honor what they are lucky enough to receive. That is not your shame to carry. Your responsibility is not to shrink until the wrong people can keep you. Your responsibility is to become so rooted in self-respect that what is misaligned naturally falls away. And yes, that may mean losing people. But some people only leave because they can no longer use the old version of you. Let them. The old version of you survived. The new version of you will lead. The old version of you begged. The new version of you observes. The old version of you overextended. The new version of you discerns. The old version of you feared being alone. The new version of you fears betraying your own peace more than temporary loneliness. That is growth. And growth is often quiet. It does not always look dramatic from the outside. Sometimes growth is simply not sending the message. Not over-explaining the boundary, not trying to convince someone to care, not begging for consistency, not rescuing someone from the consequences of their own lack of effort. Sometimes growth is staying still long enough for reality to introduce itself. And reality has a sharp voice. It says, if they wanted to, they would. If they valued it, they would protect it. If they cared deeply, it would show consistently. Not perfectly, but clearly. Stop romanticizing inconsistency. Stop spiritualizing confusion. Stop calling emotional starvation a lesson in patience. Stop shrinking your needs so people can continue offering you less than what your spirit requires. You do not need more tolerance for neglect. You need more reverence for your own energy. And once that reverence begins, your entire life starts to reorder itself. Your standards stop being negotiable. Your peace stops being optional. Your boundaries stop sounding like apologies. Your silence stops being fear and starts becoming power. You begin to understand that not every connection deserves access to your deepest self. Not every person deserves front row seats to your mind, your heart, your softness, your effort. Access should be earned, not through perfection, through consistency, sincerity, and mutual care. That is what an unbreakable mind knows. It knows that softness without boundaries becomes self-destruction. It knows that love without discernment becomes suffering. It knows that loyalty without reciprocity becomes bondage. And it knows that peace is often born the moment you stop fighting to stay where you have outgrown your role. Maybe that is where you are right now. Maybe you are standing at the edge of an old pattern. Maybe a part of you already knows you have been overgiving. Maybe a part of you is tired of being the emotional backbone for people who never truly carry you. Maybe a part of you is exhausted from showing up in places where your soul comes home emptier every time. If that is you, then hear this with all the force your spirit can hold. You do not need permission to protect your peace. You do not need a dramatic betrayal to justify distance. You do not need one final heartbreak to finally choose yourself. Sometimes quiet misalignment is enough. Sometimes emotional exhaustion is enough. Sometimes the absence of reciprocity is enough. Sometimes your spirit simply saying, I can't do this anymore, is enough. Trust that, because healing often begins long before your life visibly changes. It begins the moment you stop abandoning yourself to keep others comfortable. It begins the moment you choose honesty over performance. It begins the moment you stop showing up automatically and start asking, does this space deserve me? That is not arrogance. That is alignment. And alignment will save you from years of misplaced loyalty. You do not owe endless access just because you once cared deeply. You do not owe your future to relationships that only survived because you kept carrying the past. You do not owe your peace to people who never protected it. And you certainly do not owe your soul to any environment that requires your self-erasure in exchange for temporary belonging. Belonging that costs your authenticity is not belonging. It is captivity. And too many people are living emotionally imprisoned lives while calling it commitment. No, commitment without mutuality becomes confinement. Love without respect becomes depletion. Presence without appreciation becomes exploitation. That is why this message matters. Because maybe your breakthrough is not in doing more. Maybe it is in doing less. Less explaining, less chasing, less rescuing, less proving, less showing up where your spirit has already outgrown the invitation. Sometimes your greatest transformation begins the day you stop over-participating in your own exhaustion. Sometimes the lesson is not fight harder. Sometimes the lesson is step back and watch. Watch what survives your silence. Watch what honors your absence. Watch what reveals itself when you are no longer overcompensating for everyone else's lack of effort. And when the truth appears, believe it. Do not argue with it. Do not romanticize it. Do not water it down to protect your attachment. Believe it, because the life you want cannot be built on denial. The peace you crave cannot grow in soil poisoned by self-betrayal. And the unbreakable mind is not built by pretending everything is fine. It is built by facing what is real and refusing to abandon yourself anymore. That is your power. That is your awakening. That is your return. So stop showing up and see what happens. See who notices. See who values. See who reaches. See who only loved the version of you that had no limits. See who disappears when the access disappears. See what collapses when you stop carrying what was never yours to hold alone. And then, after you see it, do not be afraid to choose differently. Do not be afraid to become quieter, rarer, harder to access, more intentional, more discerning, more at peace. Because your peace is not something to apologize for. Your distance is not always rejection. Sometimes it is self-respect in its purest form. And one day, when you look back, you will realize that stepping back did not make you lose yourself. It is how you found yourself again. And if you're still here listening, then this message was not random. It found you because some part of you is already tired. Tired of carrying people who never ask how heavy your own heart has become. Tired of pretending not to notice the imbalance. Tired of calling one-sided effort love, loyalty, or just the way people are. Tired of giving your best to places that only remember you when you stop giving. And maybe, for the first time in a long time, you are beginning to realize something that changes everything. You have been too available to people who were never truly available for you. That truth stings. Because when you are a genuine person, you don't enter relationships calculating who gives more. You simply show up. You love deeply. You stay loyal. You support. You forgive. You pour. And because that comes naturally to you, you often assume others move with the same heart. But not everyone does. And one of the most dangerous mistakes a good person can make is expecting themselves in other people. Because some people know how to receive what they have never learned to return. Some people are experts at taking comfort, attention, energy, support, patience, forgiveness, and access, while giving back just enough to keep you emotionally invested. And that is where many people become trapped. Not in obvious betrayal, but in slow emotional starvation. A starvation so subtle that you don't even realize how empty you've become until one day you feel nothing but exhaustion. And if you know what I'm talking about, if you've ever been the one who always checked in first, always kept the connection alive, always carried the emotional weight while pretending it didn't hurt, then comment this below. I'm done forcing. Type it like a declaration, not for anyone else, for yourself. Because some of you have been carrying silent pain for too long, and this may be the first moment you finally admit it. You should not have to beg for consistency. You should not have to chase basic care. You should not have to shrink your needs so people can keep offering you less. And yet, so many people spend years doing exactly that. Years trying to become easier to love. Years trying to become less needy. Years trying to become more understanding. Years trying to become more patient. Years trying to become less emotional. When in reality, the issue was never that you needed too much. The issue was that you kept expecting depth from people who only knew how to offer surface. That changes the whole story. Because once you stop blaming yourself for not being easy enough to keep, you begin to ask a far more important question. Why am I fighting so hard to stay in places where I am not fully seen? That question is powerful because it stops the cycle of self-abandonment. It stops you from automatically assuming that every disconnection is your fault. It stops you from constantly adjusting your soul just to fit inside relationships that were never designed to nourish you. And when that awakening begins, something inside you starts to harden in the right way. Not cold, not bitter, just clear. You stop romanticizing people's potential. You stop making excuses for patterns that have already shown you the truth. You stop accepting emotional crumbs and calling them enough. And most importantly, you stop giving endless access to people who have never handled your heart with reverence. That is where your power begins. Not in becoming louder, not in proving a point, not in revenge, but in becoming harder to drain. That right there is a dangerous level of healing, because the version of you that used to run toward every problem, every silence, every misunderstanding, every imbalance, starts to disappear. And in its place rises someone calmer, someone more aware, someone who no longer panics when people pull away, someone who no longer chases what refuses to stand still. Someone who finally understands that if a connection only survives through your constant effort, then it was never standing on solid ground to begin with. That realization can save you, and I want you to really sit with that, because many of you were taught that love means never giving up, that loyalty means always staying, that strength means enduring everything. But that teaching has broken a lot of people. Because staying in spaces that are slowly killing your peace is not always loyalty. Sometimes it is fear wearing the mask of commitment, fear of being alone, fear of being forgotten, fear of starting over, fear of accepting that maybe the people you loved are not capable of loving you in the way your spirit actually needs. And that fear keeps people trapped in one-sided friendships, trapped in emotionally unavailable relationships, trapped in family dynamics where they are only valued for what they provide, trapped in patterns where they keep bleeding while telling themselves, this is just what love costs. No, love should not cost your identity. Connection should not cost your nervous system. Loyalty should not cost your sanity. And if it does, then what you are protecting may not be sacred. It may simply be familiar, and familiarity can be one of the hardest prisons to leave. Because what hurts you repeatedly can still feel like home if you have lived there long enough. That's why some people keep returning to the same kinds of relationships, the same kinds of disappointments, the same emotional cycles over and over again. Not because they enjoy pain, but because pain they recognize feels safer than peace they have never fully known. That is deep. And if that line hit you, if you felt that in your chest, then pause for a second and really ask yourself, have I been choosing familiar pain over unfamiliar peace? Because a lot of people are. A lot of people are terrified of the silence that comes after they stop overgiving. Terrified of what they'll discover if they stop texting first. Terrified of what will happen if they stop always being available. Terrified that if they stop carrying everyone, nobody will carry them. And that fear keeps them in emotional slavery. But listen carefully. You cannot discover who is truly for you if you keep interrupting the truth with your effort. That line alone should wake something up inside you. Because some of you have never actually seen the truth of your relationships, not because it wasn't there, but because you kept covering it with your overfunctioning. You kept filling every silence. You kept repairing every crack. You kept making every excuse. You kept doing the emotional labor for everyone involved. So of course the relationship looked alive. You were acting as life support. But remove yourself for a moment. Step back for a while. Go quiet. Stop explaining. Stop initiating. Stop fixing. And now you finally get to see what breathes on its own. That is where the truth begins. And the truth can be painful. Because some things you thought were deep connections were really just habits built around your availability. Some things you thought were mutual love were really emotional dependence with no real reciprocity. Some things you thought were unbreakable bonds were held together by your willingness to tolerate more than you should have. That is not easy to accept, but it is necessary, because your healing cannot begin where your denial is still in charge. And if you're hearing this right now, maybe life is trying to confront you with a question you've been avoiding for too long. What would happen if you stopped being the one who always keeps everything together? Really think about that. What would happen if you stopped being the fixer, the helper, the emotional safety net, the one who always understands, the one who always checks in, the one who always makes peace, the one who always carries the connection? Would they notice? Would they care? Would they reach for you? Would they fight for your presence? Or would the silence expose just how one-sided everything really was? That question is uncomfortable, but discomfort is often the doorway to truth. And truth, even when it hurts, is kinder than illusion. Because illusion will keep you investing years into people who only know how to take. Illusion will keep you mistaking attention for affection. Illusion will keep you calling emotional neglect just a rough patch. Illusion will keep you available to people who are emotionally absent. And the longer you live in illusion, the longer you stay disconnected from your own power. That's why this message matters. Because some of you are not weak. You are simply overextended. You are not broken. You are just tired of being everyone's strength while secretly falling apart. You are not asking for too much. You are finally beginning to recognize how little you have been receiving. That is a huge difference. And if no one has told you this clearly enough, let me say it now. You do not have to earn rest. You do not have to earn distance. You do not have to earn boundaries. You do not have to earn the right to stop over-sacrificing for people who are comfortable watching you run on empty. You can choose peace before the breakdown. You can choose yourself before the collapse. You can step back before resentment turns your heart bitter. That is wisdom. And wisdom always looks selfish to people who benefited from your self-neglect. Never forget that, because the moment you start protecting your peace, some people will try to make you feel guilty for changing. They will say you're distant. They will say you've become different. They will say you've become hard to reach. And maybe you have, but maybe that's not a flaw. Maybe that's growth. Maybe you were never supposed to remain endlessly accessible to people who never treated your presence like something sacred. Maybe becoming less available is exactly what your spirit needs in order to heal. Because healing is not always soft. Sometimes healing is uncomfortable. Sometimes healing is lonely. Sometimes healing looks like sitting in silence while every old version of you wants to go back and overgive just to feel needed again. That is one of the hardest battles you will ever fight. The battle between your old conditioning and your new self-respect. The old you wants to text first. The new you wants to observe. The old you wants to explain. The new you wants to protect peace. The old you wants to rescue the connection. The new you wants to see whether it can stand without constant saving. And right there, in that tension, is where your transformation happens. This is why so many people fail to evolve. Because evolution demands restraint. It demands that you stop reacting to every discomfort with the same old pattern. It demands that you sit still long enough for life to reveal what effort used to hide. And sitting still can feel brutal when you are used to being the one who does something. But this time, doing less may be the most powerful thing you ever do. Less reaching, less fixing, less carrying, less proving, less availability for things that drain your spirit. Because every time you keep showing up where you are not being nourished, you are sending yourself a dangerous message. My peace is less important than keeping this connection alive. That message destroys people from the inside, because it teaches them to betray themselves in the name of belonging. And any belonging that requires self-betrayal is not belonging. It is bondage. Let that settle in your chest. Some of you have not been loved. You have been tolerated because you are useful. You have been kept around because you are dependable. You have been called important because you make life easier for people. But deep down, you know something is missing. You know there's a hollowness in it. You know that despite all you give, something still feels emotionally lonely. And that loneliness is not random. It is your spirit trying to tell you the truth. Because one of the most painful experiences in life is not being alone. It is being deeply present in people's lives and still feeling unseen. That kind of loneliness is heavy. Heavy because no one around you realizes how much you are carrying. Heavy because everyone assumes you are strong. Heavy because the role you play in other people's lives leaves very little room for your own humanity. And eventually, if you do not interrupt that pattern, it will consume you. That's why this moment matters. This is not just another motivational message. This is a warning that if you keep giving your soul to spaces that only consume it, one day you will wake up and not recognize yourself anymore. One day you will feel emotionally numb. One day you will feel detached from everything. One day you will stop knowing where you end and everyone else begins. And by then, the damage will have already gone deep. So choose differently now, before the breakdown, before the bitterness, before the emptiness becomes your normal. Choose to pull back. Choose to breathe. Choose to let people reveal themselves without your interference. Choose to stop overfunctioning in dynamics that should have been mutual a long time ago. And if that means some things fall apart, let them, because not everything that falls apart is a loss. Some things fall apart because they were held together by your exhaustion. Some things fall apart because they were never strong enough to survive truth. Some things fall apart because your peace can no longer afford the cost of maintaining them. That is not failure. That is alignment. And alignment is expensive. It will cost you old habits. It will cost you false closeness. It will cost you your addiction to being needed. It may even cost you people. But what it gives you in return is worth everything. It gives you clarity. It gives you stillness. It gives you dignity. It gives you the ability to sleep at night without your soul constantly begging for relief. And once you taste that kind of peace, really taste it, you stop settling for chaos disguised as connection. You stop romanticizing inconsistency. You stop chasing what refuses to choose you. You stop abandoning your own needs just to keep everyone else comfortable. That is the beginning of emotional freedom. And if you've made it this far into this message, I want you to do something. I want you to stop for a moment and ask yourself this question honestly. Who in my life only knows how to receive me, but not truly value me? Don't ignore that question. Sit with it. Because sometimes the person you need distance from is not the one who hurt you in a dramatic way. Sometimes it is simply the person whose pattern has been quietly draining you for years. And that kind of truth requires courage. Courage to stop making excuses. Courage to stop over-spiritualizing dysfunction. Courage to admit that some people may love you in a way that still isn't healthy for your spirit. Not all love is safe. Not all connection is sacred. Not all familiarity is meant to be kept. Some things are meant to be outgrown. Some people are meant to lose access to the version of you that tolerated too much. And maybe that is where your life is heading right now. Maybe this season is not about becoming more liked. Maybe it is about becoming more free. Maybe it is not about keeping everyone. Maybe it is about keeping your peace. Maybe it is not about proving your worth. Maybe it is about finally believing it. That is where the unbreakable mind is born. Not when life becomes easy. Not when everyone suddenly understands you. Not when every relationship becomes perfect. But when you finally decide that your peace will no longer be the price you pay for connection. That decision changes everything. Because from that point on, you move differently. You speak less, but mean more. You observe more, but chase less. You give with discernment, not desperation. You stop trying to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop handing your energy to every person who demands it. And you begin to understand a truth that only healed people truly live by. Your life gets better the moment access to you becomes sacred. That is a serious sentence. Because many people ruin their peace by allowing too much casual access to their heart, their time, their mind, their attention, their softness, their energy. And then they wonder why they feel depleted all the time. You feel depleted because too many things have access to you that have not earned it. Too many people can reach you. Too many expectations can interrupt you. Too many emotional demands can enter your space. Too many draining dynamics still have keys to your inner world. And that is why your spirit stays restless. Because peace cannot grow where access is careless. You have to become more intentional, more selective, more protective, not out of fear, out of wisdom, because your peace is not fragile. It is valuable, and valuable things are not thrown everywhere. They are guarded, honored, handled with care. So why have you been treating your own energy like something everyone can casually consume? Why have you been making yourself so available to people who have never once shown the depth to handle you properly? Why have you been giving unlimited emotional access to those who only know how to show up when it benefits them? These are the questions that wake a person up. And once you wake up, truly wake up, your standards become irreversible. You start noticing things you used to ignore. You start feeling the weight of imbalanced conversations. You start recognizing emotional laziness. You start seeing where your presence is celebrated and where it is simply expected. And that awareness changes your entire life, because awareness creates choice, and choice creates freedom. And freedom is what many of you have been starving for without even realizing it. Freedom from overgiving. Freedom from emotional obligation. Freedom from being everyone's emergency contact while no one knows how to be yours. Freedom from relationships where your love is welcomed but your needs are inconvenient. Freedom from proving your worth to people who should have seen it from the beginning. That kind of freedom is holy, and it begins the moment you stop showing up automatically. So if this message is speaking directly to where you are in life right now, I want you to comment one more thing below. I choose peace, not because peace is easy, but because chaos has already cost you enough. Because proving yourself has already cost you enough. Because overgiving has already cost you enough. Because trying to be everything for everyone has already cost you enough. And now it is time to become everything for yourself. That doesn't mean selfishness. That means restoration. That means finally becoming loyal to your own spirit. That means becoming the safe place you kept trying to find in everyone else. That means learning to sit with your own silence without panicking. That means learning to let people leave without chasing them. That means learning to be whole even when others do not choose you the way you hoped they would. And once you truly learn that, you become dangerous in the best possible way. Because now your peace is not for sale. Now your worth is not negotiable. Now your standards are not flexible just because someone offers temporary attention. Now your energy is no longer easy to access. Now your life starts to reflect the respect you finally have for yourself. That is what this journey is about. Not becoming colder, becoming clearer, not becoming unavailable to love, becoming unavailable to misuse, not becoming isolated, becoming intentional. And that difference will save your life. One day you will look back at this version of yourself, the one who kept trying, kept carrying, kept bleeding, kept overextending, kept begging in silent ways to be seen, and you will feel compassion. Because that version of you was not foolish. That version of you was simply hoping people would become what they had not yet shown themselves to be. Hoping effort would eventually be matched. Hoping presence would eventually be appreciated. Hoping love would eventually become mutual. But now it is time to live in truth. Now it is time to stop forcing. Now it is time to stop overreaching. Now it is time to step back and let reality speak for itself. And when it does, believe it, honor it, move accordingly, because the strongest people are not the ones who keep enduring what drains them. The strongest people are the ones who finally say, enough, enough pretending this is mutual, enough carrying what is not mine alone, enough bleeding for connections that only survive because I keep sacrificing. Enough abandoning myself to stay emotionally available to people who have never truly protected my peace. That enough will save you. That enough will rebuild you. That enough will become the doorway to the life your soul has been begging for. And if you needed this message today, if this found you at the exact right moment, then don't just hear it. Apply it. Because insight without action changes nothing. Truth without boundaries changes nothing. Awareness without distance changes nothing. So after this video ends, be honest with yourself. Who needs less access? What needs less energy? Where do you need to stop over showing up? What truth have you been avoiding because your heart was not ready to let go of the illusion? Face it, because your next level of peace is hidden behind the boundaries you keep delaying. And before you click away, I need you to understand this with complete honesty. The moment you begin protecting your energy, your entire world will start to rearrange itself. Not because life suddenly becomes easier, but because your standards begin filtering out what was never meant to stay. You will start noticing things you used to excuse. You will begin hearing disrespect in places where you once called it just their personality. You will feel the difference between someone who values your presence and someone who merely benefits from your availability. And once that awareness enters your life, there is no going back to sleep. That is why this journey can feel lonely in the beginning. Because when you stop overgiving, some people will not know how to relate to you anymore. They were connected to the version of you that was always reachable, always forgiving, always ready, always sacrificing, always there to absorb what nobody else wanted to carry. But the moment you become more intentional, they may begin to drift. They may become confused. They may even become offended. And that reaction is not always because you did something wrong. Sometimes it is simply because your growth is exposing the shallow foundation of what they had access to before. And if that happens, don't panic. Do not mistake the loss of unhealthy access for the loss of real love. That sentence alone can save you from going backwards. Because many people return to draining relationships not because those relationships are good for them, but because the withdrawal feels unbearable. They miss the routine. They miss the attention. They miss the illusion of closeness. They miss the role they played. They miss being needed. But missing something does not mean it was healthy. Craving familiarity is not the same as being called toward peace. And some of you need to stop confusing emotional withdrawal with destiny. Just because it hurts to let go does not mean you are meant to hold on. Sometimes pain is simply the breaking of attachment. And attachment can be dangerous when it is tied to people who only know how to access your heart without protecting it. That is why this next chapter of your life requires discipline. Not loud discipline, quiet discipline. The kind that chooses silence over unnecessary explanation. The kind that stops checking who noticed your absence. The kind that refuses to abandon boundaries just because loneliness whispers old temptations. The kind that understands healing is not always dramatic. Sometimes healing is simply not returning to what once emptied you. That is strength. Real strength is not found in how much pain you can tolerate. Real strength is found in what you finally refuse to tolerate anymore. And if you are serious about building an unbreakable mind, then you must become someone who honors internal peace more than external approval. That means there will be moments when you are misunderstood. Moments when people project stories onto your silence. Moments when your distance will be judged by those who only liked you when you were easy to consume. Let them misunderstand. Let them create whatever version of the story helps them avoid accountability. Your job is not to manage everyone's perception. Your job is to protect your spirit. That is the shift. The old version of you was trying to be accepted. The new version of you is trying to be aligned. And alignment changes the way you walk, the way you speak, the way you respond, the way you love, and the way you leave. Because yes, some things must be left behind. Some conversations, some circles, some habits, some people, some versions of yourself. You cannot carry your old patterns into the life your spirit is asking for. You cannot keep choosing exhaustion and expect peace to find you. You cannot keep showing up where you are only tolerated and expect to feel deeply fulfilled. At some point, the lesson becomes very simple. Go where your presence is valued. Stay where your peace is protected. Leave where your soul is repeatedly diminished. That is not arrogance. That is wisdom earned through pain. And maybe that is where your transformation truly begins. Not in becoming someone else, but in finally returning to yourself. Returning to the version of you that does not need to overextend to feel worthy. Returning to the version of you that understands silence is not weakness. Returning to the version of you that no longer mistakes being drained for being devoted. Returning to the version of you that can stand alone without collapsing into desperation. Because once you learn how to stand alone with peace, you stop begging broken environments to hold what only wholeness can sustain. That is your freedom. That is your power. That is your awakening. So if this message stayed with you, if it hit a part of you that has been quietly exhausted for too long, then take this as your confirmation. You are not losing people by protecting your peace. You are losing what was feeding on your lack of boundaries. And what is truly meant for you will never require you to destroy yourself to keep it. Hold on to that. Live by that. Move with that. And when this video ends, don't just go back into your life unchanged. Carry this truth with you. Let it challenge your habits. Let it sharpen your standards. Let it interrupt every old pattern that taught you to bleed for places that never knew how to value your presence. And if this message spoke to you, stay with this journey. Because the next video on your screen is not there by accident. It is the next step. Watch it now, and keep building the mind they can never break.